My name is Julian Anderson. I'm a director at Bates Smart Architects. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging the fact that we're hosting this event from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all watching today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. We also pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria and across Australia. For today's event, Bates Smart's gathered a panel of experts from around the world to explore and talk about the future of our cities. And today in 2020, Melburnians are still striving for our city to once again be tailored to humans. And this shift reflects global trends away from private car use and towards a future that is much more sustainable and community focused. So this leaves us facing and having to discuss some pretty big questions, including how are we planning to live in our cities in the future, and what has this pandemic taught us about how to move and how we want to occupy our cities into the future. So these are some of the questions that our panellists will endeavour to answer today as we debate how our cities, both locally and around the world, can create greener, happier and more people-focused spaces for the future. So I'd like to introduce our panellists. Firstly, we have Rob Adams, who's the Director of City Design and Projects at the City of Melbourne. And Rob has over 46 years experience as a practicing designer, and over his career has made a significant contribution to the rejuvenation of central Melbourne. And internationally, we have Alessandra Chianchetta, based in London and New York. Today, she's joining us from New York. Alessandra focuses on radical evolution in contemporary design and game-changing urban planning. She's been the lead designer on many major projects for top international design firms, including she's now the founder and head designer of AWP Architecture. And finally, Sarah Gaventa, who is a public space expert located in the UK. She's currently director of the Illuminated River Foundation, which is delivering the longest public art project in the world and lighting up the bridge of central London. I'll hand over to Rob, who is going to start with his presentation.
Thanks very much, Julian. And the first slide I put up here is a map of Melbourne. And when I came to reflect on this discussion, it made me realize I seem to have spent most of my career adapting things. I've been married for 48 years, lived in 12 houses, and never lived in a new one. And the same seems to be the case to a certain extent with the way we've dealt with the city. So I want to talk about how our cities are adapting, and particularly a case study with Melbourne. The business as usual response from Australian capital cities is that whenever there's an expansion, we push to the fringes. And this has been apparent as we go to the next slide, that the cities are failing on the basis of that. Since 2001 with the vampire study, we can see that as people come into the city and as they push to the fringe, they become more and more disadvantaged. The cost of living out there, the cost of driving, the time spent commuting have led to social and economic issues with that population. And it is not really the solution for our city. The solution could, I believe, lie with something I saw in Cape Town when I was a student back in the mid-60s. And it started in 1969, in my fourth year, I traveled overseas, and all the baby boomers had arrived at universities, and the most exciting architecture around the world happened to be at the expanding universities. I went back to Cape Town, and if you see the picture here with Cape Town University sitting on the side of Table Mountain, designed by Herbert Baker, it had a heritage overlay, and it was surrounded by a national park. And I went back and I asked the planners at the university, so what are you going to do to expand? And they said, actually, we've asked a different question. We've asked, how well are we using the stuff that we already have? And when they looked at the facilities they had, they realized things like lecture theatres were only being used for 17.5% of the time. At that stage, there were about 4,000 students on the campus. And I went back 30 years later and they'd trebled the number of students. And the only thing I noticed is there hadn't been much building, but the vitality of the university had moved ahead in leaps and bounds. There were lots of people, it was concentrated, there was an energy, and it was an exciting place to be and visit. And I asked myself the question, if you can do that for a university, why can't you do it for a city? Coming back to Melbourne, and I've got some stats up here, Melbourne was going to move from 5 million to 10 million by 2050. And if you applied those same principles that we saw at Cape Town to the city, and we did that, we did a fairly thorough study, the result was quite startling. We could accommodate the next 5 million in Melbourne on 7.5% of the city, hence the title here, the 7.5 city. We would do this by building around the existing railway centres, which we know as activity centres, along the road-based public transport, both tram and bus, and in the greyfield sites. So we'd build around our existing infrastructure. And we'd build no higher than 5 to 8 stories so that we produced environments that were good public environments with quality streets. The most startling thing when we looked at the finances of that is that for every million people we added to the city, we would save $110 billion in infrastructure costs over the next 50 years. So going to 10 million, we'd be saving 550 billion in infrastructure costs. Imagine what we could do with that money, spending it on the right infrastructure rather than trying to catch up with ourselves as we expand the city. The City of Melbourne has practiced this philosophy of adaptation, and I'm only using one example here, which is open space. When we did an open space study back about 15 years ago, we would have to spend $700 million on acquiring the open space we needed for the population that was coming to the central city. Clearly, we didn't have that money. So what we did is we started just taking away road space. And you can see a slide here, I call it grey to green, where we've converted a diagonal road through a high density housing estate into an active park. We've taken a 500 square meter roundabout that had two-way traffic around it and converted to one-way traffic and increased the capacity of that park to 5,000 square meters. We've done this throughout our city, and over the last 30 years, we've taken over 80 hectares of space out of the city and converted it to widened footpaths, open space for our population, and saved ourselves that 700 million of money. Another typical example with the rail yards, and this goes back to when we started back in the 1980s with the rejuvenation of Melbourne. And only 12 of those railway lines there were active. And we did this drawing which showed an aspiration that if we got rid of some of those railway lines and extended our parkland, we could get this extensive park around the eastern side of our city and connect the parks right down almost to the bay. We managed to do that with Federation Square and a premier at the time, Jeff Kennett, who said, if I take away the railway lines, you pay for and design the park. And that's what we did. And what you see here is Birrarung Ma, an 8-hectare park that now connects the river back to the city. And that was part of that adaptation. So as I talk to you tonight, or sorry, this afternoon, we've got 10 new parks being created through our city by taking away roads, excuse me, and converting them to parks. This is happening at a far more rapid state than it had happened before in our city. And it's bringing people back into the city to work, live, and enjoy the city. The biggest adaptation we did was bringing back a population to Melbourne. In the 1980s, we took our population downtown from 680 units to over 40,000 units. That is the biggest adaptation Melbourne has had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Continuing the theme for a minute, focusing on Melbourne, I would like to take you through a project we undertook at Bates Smart, which was very much focused on multi-level above ground car parking in the city. And when we started this project, it became Well, we found it very interesting that car parking in the City of Melbourne accounts for 460 hectares worth of land, which actually is 1.5 times the area of Central Park in New York. It's also the third largest land use after residential and commercial property. And interestingly, we know that space for community use in central Melbourne ranks last in terms of space usage in central Melbourne, and actually is less than 1/5 of 1% total land use by area in the City of Melbourne. We're also very conscious that transport, and particularly cars, are one of the largest contributors to carbon dioxide emissions around the world. And coming back to Rob's point about population growth in the centre of Melbourne, we know that cars essentially just take up too much space in our city, and we need to create more space for pedestrians in the city. And we're very well aware that many other cities around the world have introduced measures to reduce the number of cars coming into their cities. Places like Singapore obviously introduced congestion charging back in 1975. And we're also keen to support the City of Melbourne's aspirations to increase tree canopy cover to 40% by the year 2040. And we think one way to deliver on that is to reduce the amount of car parking in our city. So we undertook a project which identified a number of potential above-ground multi-level car parking sites in central Melbourne, about 20 of them. And we developed a process or a mechanism whereby we thought, what if we could transfer the developable rights or potential developable land on these sites to other sites around the city in a kind of floor area exchange program? We know that in the City of Melbourne, typically sites cannot develop, well, there's a plot ratio of about 18:1. So for example, a site that occupies about 1,000 square metres can yield 18,000 square metres of land. And we thought if we could exchange the developable area of these car park sites, if we could sell that developable area to other sites, then other developers could exceed that plot ratio of 18:1. And typically in Melbourne, you can exceed that plot ratio through the delivery of a public benefit. So we're suggesting that public benefit could be in the form of the sold land of these car parks. So really a transfer of floor area to other sites, which would then mean that these car parks could be refurbished for community use and social infrastructure. And we know from speaking to colleagues in the industry that typically one of these car parks might be sold as is for say something like $50 million, whereas if this floor area exchange program was in place, a car park that would be sold on the open market for about 50 million could be sold for up to 90 million, which we think creates the necessary incentive for these owners of these car park sites to sell their car parks. So as you can see in this diagram, we're suggesting that the sites in orange are the 20 or so potential car park sites that could be used in this way, and we've worked out what their potential development yield would be, and then we're suggesting that development yield could be transferred onto other sites so that they could be developed and exceed that plot ratio of 18:1. And then, as I mentioned, we've looked at in detail at some 3 sites across central Melbourne. This first one here is on Hardware Lane, and we were very interested in the creation of a vertical, publicly accessible urban space and the delivery of rooftop space for cinemas, for bars. And then throughout the remainder of the building, we came up with this idea that we could retain the existing car park ramps within the building and provide flexible working environments, working pods or working studios within the remainder of the building. And then also very interested in vertical landscaping through this building. One of our other sites here on Little Lonsdale Street, is in the northeastern corner of the city. It's in a part of Melbourne which is known for its markets and its food stores, and we really liked that concept and thought we could carry this idea of a market through the ground floor of this site, deliver a ramp which connects up to the rooftop of this space and then is heavily planted. And essentially this is a calming and restorative space in the centre of Melbourne, which is providing publicly accessible open space for people to use and enjoy throughout the day. So also very interested in space that is less prescribed in terms of its use. This is another site we looked at on the western edge of Melbourne on Little Bourke Street. It's close to Marvel Stadium. We're excited by the idea that it could deliver a large amount of recreation space. So we've put a rooftop basketball court here. There's opportunities for tennis courts, and then throughout the remainder of the building, opportunities for introductions of gyms and other passive and active recreation facilities within this building. So this concept of refurbishing, retaining the existing, as much of the existing structure as possible, and therefore delivering significant space for community use and activities, which we think is much more sustainable than demolishing these buildings and starting again. We've also started to look at, well, actually, the image, the sketch shown here, we've also started to look at social and affordable housing as a potential use of these car park sites. So we don't think necessarily that this proposition needs to be solely about refurbishment, but we also think there's an opportunity for development of these sites as social and affordable housing. So in all of this, I should have mentioned, the idea is that when the owner of these car park sites sells the land as exchangeable floor area, the site actually gets handed back to the City of Melbourne, with a portion of the proceeds of the sale given to the City of Melbourne to allow for the refurbishment and adaptation of these car park sites. So we're very excited about this project. It's really founded in this idea that we're interested in creating cities that are more human focused, that are very interested in what the future of our cities is about and how we might contribute to a greater sense of community, embracing neighbourhood, urban areas and public spaces. And we think people need to be at the centre of this. Thank you. And over to Alessandra.
Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you again. So I've decided to focus on some of my work and keep it brief. I think the most relevant example of the work that we've been doing throughout the years is in between, like building strategies at large scale, framework planning or master planning, and also building to core from like small scale installations to very big, several hectares, large plans. Really, it's the multiplicity of scales and also interdisciplinarity of the scales and disciplines that we've been dealing with that sort of characterizes our work, with a particular emphasis on the public realm, on smart cities, on a series of themes that we're particularly interested in is this idea of retrofitting, building with bodies existing, and one good example, I think, that is relevant to the topic today is the work we did for the Central Business District in Paris, La Défense, as a result of winning competition, where we delivered the first master plan, focusing on particularly mobility spaces, public realm, and infrastructural spaces. La Défense, as you may know, is one of the biggest decks of slab in Europe. So it's 160 hectare site with 30 hectares of deck, of slab, meaning that the 6 levels underneath, mostly occupied by car parkings, greatly underused, I must say, because the public transportation works really well, and other infrastructures. So we were asked to do a plan to enliven, to modernize, to make this site attractive again, having it lost attractiveness. So here you can see aerial view of La Défense, this idea of modernity that was post-war modernity, largely inspired by North America, and this idea of the ambiguity of the ground and the space of the car. So this is like the first level underneath. So there are 6 levels like this under La Défense, and that's, you may recognize, it's Le Plan Voisin by Le Corbusier, which was done several decades before La Défense brought some of this idea in place, but advocating for this separation of flows, pedestrian flows and car flows. La Défense, before the work with the CNIT, the exhibition center, was one of the first buildings to be built in '58. And that, what it looks like now, quite generic with these, there are several of these pedestrian bridges connecting the center, which is carless, the cars are underneath, and the surroundings. That's one of the 6 level of parking sites underneath, and that's the vision that we did, that it's also in the monographic number of Architecture d'aujourd'hui. I like this quote by Eddie Heathcote, which talks about the embrace of complexity. A project like this really and every project in a contemporary city calls for embracing complexity, calls for dealing and building with what is already there, retrofitting what is already there, appropriating it, making it sustainable for the future, and also bringing a new forward-looking idea of what public space should be, what's a space that can congregate, can go for a new public to come. And these things have changed quite dramatically in the last few years, even with the events, terroristic events in Paris in 2015, there's been a shift in what public space is, and with the pandemic even more, because there's a renewed interest and call for nature, access to nature, landscape, health, more sustainable city space, but how also this question, that is also the question of the next Venice Biennale, of how will we live together. But to go back, La Défense, we first looked in a very traditional way at the above and below, and then came with the plan, with a sort of acupuncture plan, proposing a series of interventions. One of the biggest of which is a huge public space and also the retrofitting of the existing parking space. And at the same time, here you can see on a time frame of about 10 years, in black, the different intervention above and below. And of course, the public realm above, which is free of car, devoid of car, is in need of an upgrade in design. In these 2 images, you can see, the proposal for the retrofitting of the parking space. So on the left side, you have the existing condition, and on the right side, what we propose, which is basically really like acupuncture and retrofitting, like opening up the site to allow natural light to get in, working with light, working with paint, with nature, also like in real nature, but also artificial nature, and bringing retail. And these are some others of the interventions, where you can see again this ambiguity in between above and below, and the fact that car parks can also, this new ramp that we designed, linking Les Grandes Arches to Nanterre, is a public space above, and then below it has parking spaces, but also gym spaces, swimming pool, art galleries, and all sorts of things. So it's advocating this mixity. And very briefly, I will go to the design thing that we did mostly at the same time as we were developing the master plan, on this side of 7,000 square meters. It's also infrastructure, so we're still on the deck. There's still 6 levels underneath, with a highway and with heating stations. And so far, this was an initial image with the new arena by Christian de Park. And the principle is this, to have this infrastructural ramp with a slope of 4%, including a series of follies above and beneath, including car parking areas and sport facilities, and also cafes and restaurants. And that's what it is as built. And as you can see, like all the infrastructure elements, like this red element here is something to bring ventilation down to the parking and to the infrastructures on the 6th level that are below, are transformed into something playful. This is like a climbing wall, some others are skateboard parks and so forth. So you can see here, like just some images of the public space. And again, the public space is almost entirely pedestrian, with urban lounges that are integrated, and also urban sports that are integrated in the space itself. So you can have another view of one of those ventilation facilities that connect the above and the below. I don't know how much time we do have at another project in Liverpool, but you're telling me if I can stop here.
Yeah, I might. That's fantastic, Alessandra. I'll hand over to Sarah.
Hi. Well, I've only got a few slides because I know we're only allowed 4. I'm in London. I'm living in the Barbican, so I'm right in the heart of the city, and that's why I live where I live, because I live in what you would call, instead of a 15-minute city, and I hear in Melbourne you're calling it a 20-minute city, I suppose, because maybe you walk a little bit slower in the heat. But in London, I suppose, where I am in the centre, I would call it a 5-minute city. And that's a city where, as we're all talking about the sort of activities, everything is on your doorstep. My Marks and Spencer's is 2 minutes away. The primary school is 3 minutes away. My shops, my major infrastructure hubs, the swimming pool, etc., etc. I mean, in 5 minutes, I can go to all these things. It's fantastic. But it's a very, very different place during COVID. And we've seen something extraordinary happen in our city, especially in the City of London itself. And there is nobody here. And I think I can demonstrate that, Julian, in my slide. So there's nobody here and everything's being rethought. Could you go on to the next slide? And then I think we'll go back. That's there. And everything is being sort of, jollied up, which is quite interesting. So if we go back to the slide before, we're realizing that everything needs to change for social distancing. So we're using the opportunity of COVID in a way, now there's nobody around, to sort of play with our streets in a way it would be really hard to do. In New York, I know they put down paint and transform things and make them more pedestrian friendly, but I think there'd be a riot in London if you did that. But COVID has given us the opportunity to reduce the traffic lanes on our bridges, to put in new cycle lanes everywhere, which are causing, much consternation. And it's fantastic, the achievements that have been made in these sort of 7 months that could have taken 7 years to do. So there are some good things to having an empty city. It allows those that plan cities to almost have a full-size model city, because there isn't anybody in it. There isn't any traffic they would have to particularly worry about. So they can stick up these signs everywhere and just play on the real thing. And I think that's been extraordinary. But the downside for me of being in this lovely 5-minute city is, well, everything's shut. And all those other people that used to come into this lovely, vibrant city aren't. 90% of those office workers that came into the central London don't want to come in anymore. And they've been surveyed and they don't want to come back full time. Office rents are down 25% in a year in Zone 1. So in central London, where the rents are the highest, they're now becoming on par with outer London. And in fact, in some areas in outer London, the rents, both resi and office, are higher than central. And I know that Melbourne's also looking at what happens. We don't want to be a donut as much as we like to eat them. We need to think of a way of capitalizing on that intensity of the past and having everything on your doorstep. So so we have this conundrum, because if people aren't coming in, then maybe every vicinity will be a 15-minute city. It'll all be decentralized. There'll be these, what they call vibrant vicinities. which offer you everything, but can they really offer you anything? And that's the issue, isn't it? That's the opportunity, and that's the thing that we're grappling here with London, as I'm sure in other places, is what is it that is going to bring people back to the city centre? It won't be probably work full time, although I think it looks like most people would probably be interested in coming back 2 or 3 days a week. And so presumably if they do that, they might want to go out every night. And that means there's opportunities to think about those wonderful car parks that Julian has transformed as being things that are busy and maybe in a more intense way throughout the whole week. And maybe we don't have this great go out and get pissed on a Thursday, Friday night that we certainly do in London, and that people go out and get pissed every night of the week because the ones that come in on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday want to be out, and those that come in on Thursday and Friday want to be out too. So there's maybe opportunities there for us to look at things differently. And so we're taking stock of what can we do? Well, we've certainly been looking at how our streets work, but we're also saying that this is an opportunity for a new vision for London, isn't it? It's about the overcrowding housing that we've got, which because people have to commute and therefore live in places that they really shouldn't have. 2 couples sharing a small flat. It's not right. Our air pollution. The fact that our city is always a building site, well, that's not terribly sustainable. And if we keep tearing down an office block to build a taller one, or one with better floor plates for these office workers who aren't going to come and use it, well, then maybe that's not a bad thing if we don't have to do that. It's an opportunity to really get to grips with climate change, which we haven't done, and also to expose London's inequalities, which COVID has done in a rather stark way. COVID has also given, so the city has got some existential angst. We're having a big corporate sort of mental health issue, really. What's about the well-being of individuals, and it's also about the well-being of London. What will make London well again? And if you go to the next slide, it isn't jollying up what we've got. Sorry, the one with the bear. So this is just outside where I live, and I have to cross it to get to my Marks and Spencer's. And this is their idea of trying to jolly up the city in the summer. There was nobody there, and there's nothing quite as depressing as a giant astroturf bear at the best of times, but especially when it isn't being clambered on by children and office workers and full of people having picnics. And I think we do need to think about how our spaces work for different times that we have. And the next slide. So that is pre-lockdown. We're in a lockdown now, 2 weeks in, all going a little bit spare, but this was a couple of days before lockdown in the city. And that's what one of the busy streets look like. So people are panicking about what kind of city we're going to make. And if we go on to another slide, again, there's shopping. How we're not going to come in and shop. So we think it's culture. We think it's time that this has been a sort of, we look at culture as something that isn't just about going into galleries. It's about being out on our streets. We go to the next slide. So this is an exhibition on the outside of the Royal Festival Hall, because you can't go into the Royal Festival Hall. So art centres and buildings are now using their exteriors as their interiors. So that's why I was talking about the title of what I was saying is the outside is the new inside. There's some advantages to this. You don't have to book. You can be spontaneous. Art is all around you. It's making the city an art gallery in itself. And if you do that in the centre of London, then surely that's why people will come in and see things, come and visit, because that's not something that they're going to get in their decentralised, vibrant vicinity. And it makes it distinctive, because I think that's one of the things that's also really important. We want distinctiveness, we want experience. And so our city centres have got to offer experiences that we cannot have at home and we cannot get remotely. You have to be there. And so this is an opportunity, that kind of gathering, that moment where you say, I saw that, is really important. There's one more slide. And poetry as well. We can have those kind of moments where we engage with artists in all different forms. If we only just think more laterally about how we create a built environment that is is curated for an experience that is distinct to the place. So one of the things that the Barbican Centre have been talking about, which is a major art centre near me, which always talks about it's the second biggest in the world, and it's international. And now it's decided that actually that's all the wrong language. It needs to think about how local it is, because it hasn't got an international audience anymore. It's thinking of itself not just as an art centre, but a civic centre, a community centre. In a way, these places in our city centres can become our new town halls. I mean, all our town halls seem to have disappeared and been moved out onto business parks in Britain. But in a way, I think by using culture as a driver, that the whole of our central districts can become these sort of vibrant town gathering places and civic places for people to be. So COVID is making us try new things, and it's making us thinking new ways. We've realized that we all need to be kinder to each other, that we need, not only that, we need our cities to be kind to us. They need to be equal places for everyone. We know that nature is good for a soul, and we know that cities need to be good for our soul too. So I think this is a massive opportunity for us to explore that. On my final slide, so this is what I've been doing to trying to do something that's good for the soul of London. So this is the largest public artwork in the world, until you do it in Melbourne, of course, because you've got some very fine bridges there. And this is an artwork by the artist Leo Villarreal. And at the moment it's on 4 central London bridges, and we'll be adding it to 5 more next spring. But this is about being able to go out and experience art after dark, after you spent a whole day at home, you're going a bit spare when you're home working. To watch the ebb and flow of the river, because you can't do that from the safety of your sofa. To watch how light works against the stark sky. These are kinetic pieces as well, which move very quietly and gently. And the dwell time is about 20 minutes. And I understand that the dwell time for the Mona Lisa is 20 seconds. So I think the other thing is that our cities can give us, because you don't have to have timed entrance, is to have an immersive experience in culture. But we just need to take it up a scale. So that's my pitch for new cities.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. That's fascinating. So just picking up on your final point, we might have a bit of a chat, but so it sounds to me like the small interventions, the AstroTurf there are not the solution, and we need to be more ambitious in what we're doing.
Well, I think it's about curation, isn't it? It's about a much bigger curation of our built environment, and on different planes. So I think we always do the curation on a kind of horizontal as opposed to a vertical plane as well. And that's a great thing that your car parks can do, isn't it, really? Because you're dealing with all these different layers as well. So we think about a journey of being like this. It's what we see in the distance as well should be part of that experience, I think.
Is there another place in London that, I guess Barbican's Barbican is one of London's most amazing sort of sites, I guess, for people to live and work. Is there another place in London that you think about when you walk past and you think, wow, this could be so much better, or it could be so much different, or if we transformed it in a certain way, it could really draw people back into London? Do you think there are places in London that need radical transformation?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, Euston is one incredibly central place. I mean, King's Cross has been an incredible transformation, although there's very little social justice in King's Cross. I mean, you can't engage in very much apart from some fountains if you're not incredibly wealthy. I've never seen so many expensive shops in such a small area that seem to be only selling sort of Japanese linen shirts. It's kind of, £400 a pop. So, they are not inclusive places. And what would be great is for Euston to not be King's Cross, but to be something where they feel that there's something for everybody. We're too good in London at creating these places that you can eat off the ground because they're covered in amazing materials and things, but actually there isn't actually anywhere for you to sit to eat a sandwich unless you pay money for it. And so there is a massive social justice. So Euston is one big area. And then we're looking, Thamesmead is quite an exciting area that's just up for regeneration now. And of course it's Lend-Lease who are doing that. It's Lend-Lease who are doing Euston. That's quite interesting too. But that's a piece of nature. That's an edge, the edge of it's a riverbank, quite a bleak riverbank, very close to our city airport. But it's a landscape. And it's very interesting how you preserve a landscape in a city. And I think the interest there is that maybe there are areas in London that don't need to have the word vibrant in front of them, which is, and don't ought to be hard landscaped. But could be softer, could be a successful garden city, mini garden city. Because what we're also finding is people want to leave London because they want to be in places that are greener. And if you could offer them that in the city, then there would be a potential that they might stay because they'd have their 15-minute city, but they'd also have their 5-minute countryside. And I think that's a possible. We've still got areas in London where there's possibilities for that, but that would require massive investment in transport links, for example. That's
great, Alessandra. You're in one of the world's other great preeminent cities. How does this apply to New York? How do you see New York changing? Does it need to change? Are there things that you would like to see New York do into the future to draw people back into the city and be a more sustainable city into the future?
Yeah, well, in New York, I think it's a very good case study of how the great cities are not made uniquely by buildings or by the urban fabric of buildings and public spaces or parks in between the buildings, in this case Central Park, but also by the vibrancy, the energy, the intensity or the presence of human action that takes in between the building. And that's why public space, public realm is so important, because it's what enables this action to take place. And what I'm experiencing now, there are two trends. One trend is that, maybe three. One trend is like an exodus from the city to upstate or the Hamptons as a result of the pandemic, being New York a very dense city, and this is still ongoing. The city has taken a hit. So there's a certain aliveness, maybe more than elsewhere than in the world or in Europe right now, but you can perceive, this it's not New York as it used to be, because it's lacking this intensity. It's like people working in office spaces and people using the city. It's lacking those level of human activity, 24 hours, 7 days a week. This is not there yet. It will come back, of course, but I think certain things will be reevaluated. So I can't say how permanent will be this trend of people moving upstate. And now it's very, very difficult to find a house upstate or a piece of land and build. There's a huge demand, and the city is emptying. It might be long term. There might be like a reasonable need for access to nature, a reevaluation of priorities, I think, on behalf of people, and then people working remotely. So that's kind of lifestyle that wouldn't be possible in the past would be. But then there's another thing that is like a sort of what happens to the office spaces that are left vacant. Well, I know not in New York, but in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, for instance, there will be a reevaluation in July 2021, but like some are planning to leave the headquarters half empty and have people working remotely forever. So what about here? What is it happening here? I don't think cities like New York or London will never die. They're very resilient and they're powerful attractors. So I don't think that, I think this trend of getting out of the city of very introverted is like a temporary trend, but for sure certain priorities will be reevaluated, certain For instance, here in New York, outdoor dining was not as common as in Europe. So you wouldn't have cafes and restaurants with terrace and tables outdoor. And now you can see all sorts of structure, both in the summer, but also structure that are sheltered and apt for winter, fall or winter, mild winter at least, used. So probably this kind of occupation of the public realm that makes the city more European, slower pace as well. This is likely to stay. Certain things, then it's hard to know now what happens to retail, to the retail spaces, because that's quite important and key also in a city. How those active frontages activate the public space. So what is happening to independent, business owners or small or like retail spaces that are not owned by big groups? That's hard to tell now. For sure, there will be changes. I think that it will be permanent. But the most striking thing is to feel how much of the energy of the cities and peculiarity of the cities done not uniquely by the buildings, by the brick and mortar.
People.
But by people, by human activity.
Rob, that's something we've been talking about, picking up on both Alessandra's and Sarah's point that the energy comes from the people, not necessarily the places and spaces that we create. And you're at the, I guess it's fair to say you're spearheading part of the change in the Melbourne CBD through the delivery of all of these outdoor spaces for dining and for people getting together, which I fully agree with Alessandra is one of the real positives that may come out of this. Do you want to talk to us about what's happening in the city of Melbourne?
Oh, look, I think there are a lot of positives that will come out of it. I mean, just taking the outdoor dining, I mean, Melbourne, in bringing back that population in the late 1990s and through to the 2000s, you saw 2 sidewalk cafes go to 500 sidewalk cafes in the central city. We've now had 800 new applications for sidewalk cafes, and they've rolled out rapidly when the city was reopened a few weeks ago. We've also had the opportunity to, roll out bike lanes. We've added 40 kilometers of protected bike lanes during the close down. Excuse me. But I think the biggest opportunity are in 2 areas. As in the 1990s, when we used underutilized office buildings to bring back a residential population, one of the downsides of that is we pushed out the creatives and we pushed out the less advantaged people in the city. I think as we see an underutilization again of office space, the opportunity is to actually bring back the creatives and make available more affordable accommodation. I think Sarah, touched on that. And I think that's a real opportunity for the downtown. We're going to have, and Sarah again covered it, people working at different hours. That's going to take the peaks off the road. So we can stop building roads. We're spending billions of dollars on roads that we don't actually need. We can reinvest that money in creatives and bringing people downtown. The other big opportunity for Melbourne, and this isn't central Melbourne, this is metro Melbourne, is we've all been living locally. Melbourne's had one of the harshest lockdowns in any city in the world. And suddenly we've started to value the places that we live in and close to. If those places regenerate and become better places, as the CBD has over the last 20 years, that is good for the whole metro area in terms of utilization of that fabric, and the point I was making in the earlier presentation. If the metro area is healthy, then the central city will be healthy because we've got a radial system of transport connection. So I think this is one of the biggest resets that Melbourne could have, and a huge opportunity to make not just the downtown a better place, but to make the whole metro area a better place. And I only wish I was a lot younger to be around in 30 years' time to actually see it, reach that sort of finality, because I think it is an exciting period.
So I think I think that might be it in terms of time. So thank you, thanks everyone for joining us. That's a wonderful discussion. I like I guess the thing that sort of sticks with me is, Sarah, your comment that we might be able to achieve or start to achieve in thinking in 7 months what might have otherwise taken 7 years. Thanks everyone for joining us for this live Q&A session, joined by Rob Adams and Alessandra Chianchetta from New York. So I'm going to read through some of these questions that have been coming through. The first one's for you, I think, Rob. Question is, what is being done by the City of Melbourne to incentivise people to reduce driving in the CBD?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that people will see when they come back to the city is that a lot of the parking spaces have been taken over and become parklets and dining areas. We've also running out about 40 kilometres of dedicated bike lanes. So the road space would have been significantly decreased, from pre-COVID times. And I was in the city this morning, and not only are there fewer cars, they seem to be driving a lot slower. We've also looked at a reduction of the speed limit. So in the little lanes, for instance, that's down to 20 kilometres speed limit. So there are a number of initiatives going on, and hopefully long-term, some of those initiatives become permanent, and they're not just temporary for the revitalisation of COVID. There's also a program of artworks going into lanes. I think there are about 16 of those. And there's a program of busking and entertainment that's going on at the moment.
Fantastic. Okay, the next one is a question that I guess we could all have a go at answering. Do you have a favourite example of a parking conversion project? Why do you think it was successful? I mean, Alessandra, maybe we might answer that question in a few ways. I think also any central city urban regeneration projects that you can think of that you might have been involved in or that you've seen?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, sure. I work myself in the conversion of parking spaces at La Défense in the Central Business District in Paris. We have 6 levels of underused parking spaces, and we did a master plan for the public spaces and the mobility spaces there for the future 50 years at La Défense. And one of the main points was to allocate underused spaces that weren't used as parking lots, and located in between, above and below the deck, the slab. So and allocate them to new uses and programs, so that this would attract the different populations to the Central Business District. And so we did lab fab. We found out about 10,000 square meters, about 100,000 square feet of underused space, or space that could be reclaimed to locate different uses. And then I can think of like parking lots like the Lincoln Road project by Herzog de Meuron in Miami, which is a parking lot, but it's equally it's a mixed-use building. It's and in the space of the parking lot itself, you can have yoga sessions, you can have all sorts of events, and then some housing is comprised in the parking lot building itself. On the top, there's a restaurant, there's some retail, so it's an interesting building in a way, interesting new
And
typology.
can I ask a question, Alessandra? Your La Défense project, I saw in some of your images that you showed us this idea of getting landscape into and voids into basement car parks, which is pretty spectacular concept. I think very exciting.
Yeah.
Did you is it how difficult is it to make that happen? I mean, it would be amazing if we could get more landscape into our multi-level or basement car park structures.
Yeah, we did in a way, like in a sense, this deck is one of the biggest infrastructure of that kind in Paris and even in France is 30 hectares over the 160 hectares of overall central business district. So, and it's like the roof of a building, and the certain situation where it can be holes can be created to have the lights going down. And of course, it's not a sort of, you're on a deck, on a slab, so the sort of nature, there's not much room for roots or big trees, but there's a way of landscaping also through light or through softscape that is possible in those areas. And you have a lot of situation where you're in fact in between the above and below, where there's a certain ambiguity due to differences in levels.
Fantastic. Rob?
Look, I think a couple of favourites. One of the favourites is back in the early 90s, the city bought what used to be the old women's hospital site on the corner of Lonsdale and Swansea Street. And we did a mixed-use development there. It was when postcode 3000 was taking off, and we needed supermarkets. So we got the supermarkets underground and we got 20% open space. And then we had a mixed-use development, and it had residential, commercial, retail, childcare. But the politicians of the day wanted 2,000 parking spaces, and we, by that stage, realized this was maybe not a smart thing to do. But so what we did is we insisted that if the parking was provided, it was provided above ground, flat floored and high ceiling heights, on the basis that it could be converted in the future. And about 18 months ago, Breathe Architects were commissioned to take one of those whole floors and convert it to residential. So I think that for me is an example, if we're going to build these facilities, let's build them so they can be adapted. And I love the project that Alessandro is doing at La Défense. I mean, I think of the Barbican also is a possibility. When I walked around there, there's a whole lot of parking spaces that aren't being used. And, you can think of knocking holes through floors, making double volumes and things like that. But Alessandro also mentioned surface level car parks, and people might not be aware, but back in the 1980s, the city banned any surface level car park. So we've systematically gone through the city, and we're about to take off the largest and last one, which is the QVM car park that is, I think it's 1.7 hectares. And we're pushing half of that underground, and we'll turn that into an open space. So the whole idea of how we get rid of the car parking spaces over time is exciting. And I think that's why, Julian, the project that you put forward is really exciting, because I think there's going to be a surplus of car parking spaces. So let's just hope we've got flat floors that can be converted, and that we haven't got the sloping decks that are on many of those car parks.
Well, actually, it's interesting. Yeah, I on the back of this topic that we've been discussing in the last few days, I did get a call from a client yesterday who said that he wanted to have a chat next week about putting a rooftop bar and cinema on top of a multi-level car park that he owns in the CBD. So I think I think we might be able to generate some momentum behind this, all of this, and get some really good outcomes.
Well, I think there's going to be one of those appearing in a not too distant future. We've been looking at a particular car park that we've got an interest in and trying to encourage them to reuse it. And I think that's going to see fruition shortly.
Yeah, look, I think the good thing is I think we're all thinking about this pre-pandemic, and actually, like a lot of the things we're doing as architects and designers, things that might have taken 7 years to do are now taking 7 months, and there's an acceleration of design thinking, and you know, you almost think that while the city isn't so occupied at the moment, now's actually the time to think about doing some of these refurbishment projects to minimise the impact on the operation of the city.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the advantages we took was up at QBM that we're restoring the sheds up there, and we just fast track that. So when you know, people go back up to QBM when the merchandising reopens, all of those sheds would have been restored. You know, by the end of the year, early next year. Yeah.
And look, I think there's probably a two-phase. There might be a short-term solution for some. You know, I can imagine a rooftop bar and cinema, a short-term, highly flexible, modular sort of construction that is a short-term solution that contributes to an improvement on the public realm, but doesn't you know, doesn't mean that we can't then undertake greater refurbishment of these car park buildings.
Alessandro, how many levels do you go down at La Défense when you cut through? How many levels do you cut through?
It's 6 levels.
6 levels. Okay, that's
So
impressive.
It's a very complex piece of infrastructure, in fact, that was created. And there's a multiplicity of you know, there's the metro, there's a RER, which is like the Greater Paris underground system. There's a it's not a highway, but it's a fast road. And then there's even a former nightclub. There's former studios for artists underground. There's all sorts of technical installations as well. So it's very complex and parking as well. And abandoned.
How do you, and you did talk about this very briefly in your presentation, Alessandro, how do you deal with the sort of surplus of space that exists at La Défense to create that, you know, that sort of energy and proximity of people to build fabric and to each other? How do you deal with that at La Défense, where you've got these just vast sort of unending open spaces?
Actually, it's very complex. That's the complexity of it. This was a sort of very, apparently very rational, but in fact extremely complex post-war project. It was, you know, even the levels of infrastructure as drafted by the engineers of Pont-et-Chaussée is only apparently rational, but there's a lot of, it's almost a Blade Runner kind of landscape. And then you have this opposition of the below and the above, and above is like this pedestrian slab, really with separation of flows. There's no vehicular flow, and this slightly cold, sleek, steel and glass environmental perception. Even it's colder there than in the rest of Paris because of the wind coming through the towers. And then there's this surplus space because actually public transportation works really well. So those car parking are underused, and there's possibility to reconvert them or have car parking function and then something else close to it. Also because most of the revenues that go to the entity that sort of manages the Défense, it's a government entity. Called EPA Design, de facto, by the time we were working there, now it has changed. Again, were brought by car parking spaces and then event planning on surface. Things like advertising or film shootings, and so forth. So it's really interesting to see how different functions can be combined. Of course, maybe it's more difficult if you go 6 levels below that. There are issues of security as well and fire exits as well. But on the level immediately below the slabs, there's many places where there's this ambiguity of where is the ground, where you can intervene.
Fantastic. There's another question here we might answer. There's an argument that converting car parks isn't feasible in a car-crazy city like Melbourne. Can converting these buildings really work in the long term, or should we just replace them entirely? Rob, do you have a view on that? You're on mute, Rob.
Apologies, there's a bit of noise in the background, so I thought I'd mute myself. Look, I think I mentioned it a bit in my talk. My first default is to reuse, because why knock down something if you can find another good use for it? So what's going to happen to the motor car? Apart from becoming electrified, I'm not sure it'll become completely driverless, but maybe it does. But what I think will happen is commercially we will stop owning individual cars. I think Uber is the first step in the car becoming a business unit itself, and the need to actually own a car. If we sit down with ourselves this evening and think about how much it costs us to run a car, what's the registration, what's the license, what's the fuel, what's the tolls on the road, it is the worst investment anybody ever makes in their life. So I think people are going to start working this out. So I think there will be fewer cars, and therefore, quid pro quo, there'll be fewer car parks. People see the car as a business unit, so they Uber it, they call it up and it picks them up and takes it somewhere. There's no need for parking. So we're going to have huge structures that are redundant. Do we want to knock them all down and lose all that embedded energy, or do we want to do what you guys are suggesting and do some conversion? And I would default to the conversion first. And maybe it's just in my nature. I mean, as a young architect, I converted tobacco barns and grading sheds to primary schools in Zimbabwe. I just found that they give you a new challenge, because you've got something that's fixed. You've got to carve and cut, as Alessandro is doing at La Défense. And that's actually quite exciting, because you don't come with this blank sheet and dream up something that you think will be brilliant. What you've got to do is do the surgery, the acupuncture surgery that Alessandro talks about, to make that thing work. And in the end, I think those results are sometimes more exciting, because you get a bit of the past and a bit of the future. So it's that continuity and change that we get.
Yeah, look, I think that's very exciting, Rob. And one of the things that was interesting for us in our project was creating a different type of space as well. And I think we're conscious that so much of the space in Melbourne is private and commercial. And Rob, you and the team at the City of Melbourne for a very long period of time have made huge strides in terms of creating public space. But we sort of think that these vertical publicly accessible spaces are a new, potentially quite interesting type of space that can have voids, landscape, scaffolds, stairs, flexible, not necessarily always not necessarily putting aesthetics at the top of the tree in terms of making decisions, but something that's a bit, maybe we make some mistakes in designing these buildings, but they're adaptable and flexible and robust enough for people to use them in different ways over long periods of time. And I guess, you could imagine that something like M Pavilion would be perfectly suited to some of these car park structures, arts festivals, design festivals, rooftop
Absolutely.
cinemas, all the sorts of things that people want to get involved in. But there isn't necessarily a place for them in central Melbourne, or enough of a place for them.
I was surprised at how well the rooftop spaces took off, from rooftop cinemas to, little groovy bars and stuff like that. Melbourne's an interesting city. It's very European, Alexandra, in many ways. And so we spend a lot of our time, the Aboriginals have a word for meeting, and it's Tandera. And it happens in our area here. And it's about the festival of coming together to meet. And when I heard that for the first time, I thought, that defines Melbourne. Melbourne is a meeting city. We want to always get together and meet in a cafe, in a bar, at a sports field, somewhere. And when people started converting roof spaces to bars and gardens and rooftop cinemas, it became very exciting, because it's the secret space that you discover. It's not something you walk past on the street. You've got to discover it. And Melburnians love discovery. I mean, we all have our secret spaces that we love to go to. We tell everybody about them, but we still think they're secret. And, I think the roof does that. And I think there's huge potential for, the use of roofs in this way. Maybe even more so than green roofs, because I think green roofs require huge maintenance. Whereas an active roof is mostly something that you not only get a return on, but you don't have to spend a lot of money creating it.
No, indeed, I agree. I had the pleasure to be in Melbourne last year, just August 2019, to give a lecture with Donald Bates at the university. And indeed, it's a very European city. It was striking out the plan also of having the master plan of Melbourne allows for this variety and vibrancy, I would say, along the street, not just around squares or major hubs like art centers, the art precincts and so forth, but also around, just along the streets. It's a very European feel, yet is it distinctive of Melbourne. So I see this one question, so what could be brought to Melbourne in terms of European car park conversion experience, what can be experimented in Melbourne. I think the thing that is key to me is to really go towards this mixed use programming of the spaces, hybrid spaces. So like on the one hand is like the importance of retrofitting and using what is already there. It's also like an issue of sustainability. On the other hand is like partial retrofit of what is there. And so with additions and grafts of new elements and buildings, but also in terms of program, what is interesting is when a program is hybrid, it's sort of as different components that get into it, and components that might be even unusual and unthinkable. So it's not just about, that's the success of the Lincoln parking in Miami. On certain level, it's also a sort of iconic building, but in like a car park can be, if it's a building, you know, can be almost a lookout space, almost a beacon for this. And this is learning also from not just from Europe, but you know, I was in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, and so like revisiting Frank Gehry's early car parking, but you have like in Italian rationalist architecture also countless examples where these buildings are really not just functional, but they are like architectural gems in a way. And then so you have this like a possibility for a building to go up and to have a rooftop, but also to host all sorts of different uses, and maybe have also like the possibility of having a plurality of programming in the same space, that the same space be used for something, and then something on a certain day or season, and then something else on. So there would be a sort of rotation, like the flexibility of the space, where it's not just having, I don't know, a cafe or a lounge or a place where to work in a more serendipitous way, or we will be able to work together again, or just having retail, but having, and this is a little bit like I remember in Mumbai in India, and in text by Raul Mehrotra as well on like this pulsating city that is based also on incredible density, but this idea that a cricket ground could be the place for a market, and then for a marriage, and then for something else. Like this idea of like rotation, or using the space creatively for different uses. So I think
that's very exciting, Alison. I mean, particularly I think that's why I kind of like this idea that because the space is not so prescribed, that and also I think the thing that I'm interested in is this idea that we don't, we take some risks with the space, because, you know, I think it's easy to be conservative about the way we design the space, and it's got to have a very clear brief, and it needs to be precise on the day that it's built, and it's, you know, it's going to cater to this number of people, and it's going to have a cafe that does this, and but I think these spaces should be more relaxed and flexible, and allow for people to get married in them, and to play their tennis match, and to play bowls, and actually maybe pop-up libraries.
Well, Alessandro mentions that, and I was actually in Mumbai so many years ago. In fact, I was with Raul's father-in-law, Charles Correa, the late Charles Correa, was fantastic. And they put us up in an apartment. And when I looked down the roof, there was actually a cricket match going on a rooftop. And, you know, it was sort of confined, and I'm sure if you hit it over the wall,
Lost a few
you
balls,
were out. But all of the space was, and in the apartment building we were, there was a school. And the playground for school was the staircase. So, you know, if you came down at break time, there were just kids everywhere all over the staircase. So I think you're right. I think these buildings can be used in that more temporal use, where they have different uses at different times of the day. And that makes them even more exciting. In fact, in Johannesburg, we went into a car park that was used as a market in Hillbrow, which is right in the center of Joburg. And this was about 5 years ago. And on a Saturday, the whole car park got converted to a market. And it was terrific. I mean, it was both food, you know, fresh and cooked in the car park. So I think, you know, there's huge potential.
How do we manage these spaces, Rob? Who takes, is part of the success of those sorts of relaxed, unprescribed spaces the fact that there isn't a commercial imperative, which is driving the
I think it comes back to this thing of, you know, how do we manage our time? So there are going to be periods of the day where car parks are underutilized. And in Fitzroy, there's one called the Fitzroy Mills. And it's a little car park just off Brunswick Street in Rose Avenue, or Rose Street, where there's also another little market. And every Saturday that becomes a fruit and veg market. And it's managed obviously by a private individual who's negotiated with the owner that you've got an empty car park, you know, at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And I don't know what their financial arrangement is, but why don't I lease it off you? And then he subleases it to a whole lot of people who run it as a market. So what it needs is, you know, the entrepreneurial nous of people just to say, you know, most of our space is underutilized. Our roads are underutilized for most of the day. It's just at 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock that they're busy. You know, our schools are underutilized for half of the day. You know, when you have an earthquake in Christchurch, half the schools fell down. The next week, they had all the kids in school. They ran school in the morning, school in the afternoon. All they got was, you know, transferred the teachers across to a school that exists. So the infrastructure in our city that is underutilized is huge. It's not good for our profession. Maybe we don't have to start building a whole lot of new infrastructure, but we could convert and use more, you know, creatively a lot of the space we already have. So I think that's the exciting thing that this project starts to ask the question on, you know, how do we use what we've got at different times of the day more efficiently? And I think Martha, you know, with the multiple uses over the day, Alessandro, with the multiple uses over the day, you know, points to that use. Apologies, I was talking to Martha Swartz, one of your colleagues in New York today, so I mixed you up.
Okay.
I've got another question here. We might have covered a bit of this already, but it's Alessandra, based on your experience with European car park conversion projects. I guess you might have covered that already. Are you looking at other projects in the city or other regeneration projects in Europe? You think that are relevant for us here in Melbourne?
Well, there's several. I think that there's an overall tendency. I can't think of any specific project, but I think there's an overall tendency to have landscaped car parks, or car parks that again are close to something else, and car parks that are in other ways like more integrated, or where taking into account also the flexibility of because we have more and more in European cities like car share systems, or also alternative ways of moving in the city, like sort of softer ways to move in the city. So there's this kind of assumption that we will have less and less cars in the city, and necessity of car parking spaces. So those are designed in a way not in the traditional functional way we would design them like some decade ago, 20 years ago, but in a way to incorporate already a certain playfulness also of materials of public space so that the car park can be something else. I can think in Switzerland, in most Swiss cities, the quality of car parks is incredibly high, and it's functional. There's not even, like, it's just the way things are made. So like, another thing is like the wayfinding of graphic design, just using paints and in a more, of course, in a safe way, but also in a more playful way. You can have these spaces actually turning into something else if they're under use or when they're not used, or incorporating other functions. So there's this principle, I was partially answering to this question before, this principle of like that space is precious in cities, and so you want to use this space overlapping different functions when possible. So I think that's the trend I've observed myself.
Are there other things that you think we need to do, or if you had an opportunity to look at, London or Paris or New York, are there things that you'd like to see more of in our cities, or things you think we can do in the short and medium term to make them more attractive for people?
I think you do pretty well in Melbourne. I was very pleased with my visit. It's a very vibrant city, but I would say like I would perhaps invest more in public realm of a certain in the. That's the first question as well. Now, how do we incentivize the use of public space versus and perhaps reduce the private one? I'm not sure you need to reduce the private one. If you don't need to, you can keep it spacious. But of course, in cities, you want a certain density, and which now is desirable and not desirable in times of pandemic, but that's another, it's another issue. So like to go for a highly qualitative public space that is inclusive, meaning that it's easy to navigate, easy to, to access for all sorts of publics, not intimidating. And it's a space where like in the city, we have fairly good climate in Australia, so for many months a year, like this idea of using the empty space in between buildings and parking spaces as well, with this idea of flexibility for all sorts of uses, like making people congregate and use the city as their own backyards, but a better backyard because it's more generous and open and with principles of sharing. So I think I would just look all around the world. What are the best practice examples? This is something that we always do wherever you are. But then the other interesting thing is like, how do you conceive those buildings as sort of mixed use and beacons as well, like attractive buildings, which is something that you're already doing for as far as I can see, but go that path, perhaps even be more daring and radical through design, but not just design, because design is one part, but what is important is this programming, this bringing different publics, this bringing different functions, seasonality, temporality, how the space evolves in time, how flexible it can be. Can it become almost a cinema, an outdoor cinema? Can it become or a drive-in cinema? In these times of COVID, can it become a market? Can it become a place for yoga? Can it become, temporary open air office, and then and so forth?
I think there's also huge potential with other infrastructure, and you think of the elevated, train lines and roads, and so you've got the High Line in New York. In Auckland, they've just closed a whole elevated freeway and turned it into a super bike highway. And it's become a huge artwork, and things like that can become fantastic. I mean, we did that to a certain extent in Melbourne, where down by the turning basin, we used a neon light just to turn an engineering structure into a sculptural structure. But if you look under all the freeways in Melbourne, most of them are parking lots and, very low use spaces. Imagine if we recreated all those spaces in some more positive way. And it comes down to a discussion with the road authorities that they keep them open and temporary so that they can maintain the structure above. But there are ways of doing that. I mean, the aquarium is built underneath the rail infrastructure. There's just pockets left in the aquarium so they can get up and maintain their structure. So I think the opportunities for the reuse of space of, car parks, engineering infrastructure, those residual spaces that Alexandra was talking about is huge. And what we've got to do is walk around our city with those eyes and just say, what is the potential for that? I think COVID has actually opened those eyes. I think people are walking around the city, looking at cities in a different way as to how can we make them better, more meaningful places locally, as well as the CBDs of the city.
Fantastic. Well, look, we'll wrap up now. So thank you to you both. Very enjoyable discussion and conversation, and thanks to everyone listening live and for all of your questions. We look forward to continuing this debate and discussion and making a difference to the future of Melbourne.
Thanks to you for the invitation. Pleasure to be with you in Melbourne, if only virtually.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Good.